Thank you very much for joining us today at JALT International 2020. Please welcome Marcel van Amelsvoort from Juntendo University, who will be presenting on oral reading fluency practice for learner groups. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Margalit. My presentation is about oral fluency. It's reading aloud specifically, and it is particularly aimed at earlier literacy groups such as junior high school, but could be applied to other situations, high school and college certainly. I want to start off with a couple of quotations, one from Nation and one from Grab and Stoller. And the one from Nation is particularly important, I think. How does today's teaching make tomorrow's text easier? So we always need to remember as reading teachers, how is what we are teaching the learners to do today, or the skills and knowledge they're building in our classes now, how is that going to make the next text that they encounter easier for them to read? And the other thing is, Grab and Stoller say that we need to put more emphasis on vocabulary, reading practice and processing fluency in order to improve those basic skills so that learners will not have interference from their L1 and will be able to manage with comprehension more significantly. It all comes down to this, automatic word recognition. And for reading teachers, this is, I think, a very important image and something we always need to keep in mind. That is, we are trying to build up in learners this connection between their pronunciation, the meaning, and the spelling or the language that they see in print. And our job as reading teachers is to make this connection as tight and efficient and automatic as possible. So when a learner sees a word, they immediately recognize its meaning and can recall its pronunciation. Likewise, when they hear its pronunciation, they immediately recognize its meaning and can imagine its spelling. One activity that's been used to strengthen that and to improve or bridge that to reading comprehension is fluency training. And today I'm going to talk about fluency training. The most common type of fluency training is oral reading or reading aloud, repeated reading aloud. And we'll be looking at that certainly, but I also want to expand a little bit on that activity. But what is reading fluency? So fluency is the ability to read like you speak. Well, that sounds fine. However, more concretely, it means accurate reading of connected text at a conversational rate with appropriate prosody or expression. These are the three key elements of reading fluency. Now, for us as teachers in Japan, we might think, well, yeah, that sounds fine in the L1, but accurate reading of connected text, how accurate does it have to be? And a conversational rate, well, our learners are not native speakers, nor are they very proficient. So what kind of a rate is that? And appropriate prosody and expression, this is a really, really difficult thing to manage for EFL students. They're not familiar with the sound system of English. They're not sure what appropriate means. They have to learn that. So how do we do it, and why is it so important for our learners, or is it so important? So I'm going to try to answer some of those questions today. All right. And I want to take this view that it's not just repeated reading that we're trying to do. We're trying to combine three different approaches to language learning or knowledge from three different approaches. The first one, of course, is at the bottom, fluency training, the importance of repeatedly encountering and working with language that you are already familiar with. And that's going to be central to our approach today, but I want to combine that with two more, deliberate practice and vocabulary learning. For deliberate practice, we want to practice until we reach mastery. This is the type of practice we engage in when we are trying to learn something very well for the purpose of improvement. All right, so we try it, we get feedback, we examine that feedback, we use that to improve our performance. The other one is vocabulary learning, and research from the last few years of vocabulary uh, on vocabulary learning has shown us that vocabulary is extremely important for learners to read, to learn, of course. They need to learn the form, and this includes the morphology. So we often just assume that they understand all of the different forms of a word if they understand one of them, and that's not really fair. Learners also need to know the range of the meaning, its use across contexts, and they need to see words multiple times. This is really important for learning. The last one is salience. They need to be able to notice these words when they are in new contexts. So all of these things are important for vocabulary learning. Um, Reading fluency in L1 English pedagogy. Oral repeated reading goes back to Samuels, especially in the 1970s. And he found that by having the students repeat and read repeatedly, that they improved their performance in terms of fluency. Chomsky, also in the 70s, this is not the famous Chomsky, this is a different Chomsky. She found that she gave her students audiobooks and had them listening to stories while they read. And she found that by getting them to do this about 20 times, she was able to build up their uh, rate and speed and accuracy of reading and also improve their comprehension. And she was working particularly with low level or struggling readers. The research on English oral reading and fluency training progressed quite a lot in the 1970s and 80s. And in the year 2000, it was recommended as something that all teachers need to do, all reading teachers need to do to improve the reading skills of students. And if we look at what has emerged in the last few years in terms of pedagogy, what types of activities are useful or important or effective, well, fluent, speedy, and accurate word recognition, right, frees up their cognitive resources, and that's what happens. And there are strong correlations between oral reading fluency and comprehension. So a lot of research has found this, right? And we find rates in gains in rate, accuracy, and comprehension, and also comprehension that transfers to new texts. And this is really important. So it's of course important to build up readers' fluency with one text, but if that doesn't transfer to a future text, then we're not really developing the skills. The other thing is that prosody has emerged as an important part of reading fluency. And uh, according to Kuhn and Schwanenflugel, that it helps learners to learn the shades of meaning. Razinski also publishes a lot of work, and he stresses the importance of adding phonological features to reading in order to improve reading fluency and comprehension. Okay. So we find results in improved comprehension beyond the gains from increased speed when readers focus on prosody. And Kuhn and Schwanenflugel also suggest that it may help with language learning via working memory. There's a lot of research also on subvocalization, and this is the way that people kind of hear a voice reading in their heads. So as you read the passage here on the slide, you're probably hearing it in your mind's ear. And Rayner has done a lot of work on eye tracking and subvocalization, and he, after looking at a lot of this and summarizing it, he comes up with this quote: "Although the meaning of individual words can be determined without recoding, so this means vocalizing, written language into speech, phonological representations clearly affect how words are identified." Further, phonological codes or prosody appear to be activated for most words we read. And this phonological information is held in working memory and used to comprehend text. So there seems to be a strong connection to that sound of the words in our head and the way that we comprehend the meaning of written text. A lot of other researchers, particularly Airy and Scher, and have come up with different theories to show that phonological processing is crucial when learners sound out words, add new words to their vocabulary, or comprehend longer strings of text. So what is the effective pedagogy? Well, three things are very important for improving performance when we do reading aloud or these types of fluency activities. One is teacher modeling or some kind of modeling, but particularly teacher modeling. Of course, it can also be done by peer or by audio. It should be slow enough that the learners can manage it and understand it. Right? And it should be a good model that learners can achieve, right? Repeated reading, so doing it multiple times. The number of times seems to be connected to the performance, of course. And Chomsky, as I said, suggests 20 times for the audiobooks. And typically more times improves the performance on target texts, but not always on transfer. So if you put more time into working with one text, you'll definitely get improvement. But that doesn't necessarily transfer to future texts. That's a key point. Progress monitoring and feedback. So speed and accuracy should be tracked. So we need to track speed and performance, set targets for these, and look for performance feedback increases. So we need to track and time, and that means counting our students as they do these things. All right. How about in the L2? Well, the L2's picture is a little bit more mixed. Researchers have generally found that it's beneficial. Some of the two of the better research papers are listed here, Gorsuch and Taguchi and Chang 2019. They found improvement in fluency and comprehension through repeated reading. And when I say repeated reading, I mean oral repeated reading. Right. And Chang found speed and accuracy gains with students at all proficiency levels. We also occasionally find studies where it doesn't work. This one by Taguchi and Gorsuch, they found that it led to gains in oral proficiency for some learners, but it did not transfer to silent reading improvement. And this one by Shinzawa, he did not find any gains on term tests in schools. So he was hoping that oral reading would provide an improvement on term test performance by his students, and he didn't find that. What's interesting about these is that no model for the Shinzawa one, for example, no model was given and no feedback was given, just repeated reading. Okay, so what are some of the factors that affect L2 fluency effectiveness? Well, adding a phonological element to word recognition training seems to help. Sound utilizing approaches, this is a similar idea, including shadowing are effective. Repeated reading aloud was best when there's a model. And Shimono found that repeated reading plus chunking plus time pressure led to the best gains. Prosody seems to be more predictive of reading comprehension than accuracy with some learners, and in this case, it's Japanese and Chinese learners. So there may be language difference issues as well. Okay, we have to be a little bit careful. If we practice with the same text, we are going to get a practice effect. Of course, they're better with that text, but that doesn't necessarily lead to improvement on the next test. So what we're hoping for is transfer of practice effect. We want the rate, accuracy, and prosody improvements seen on future text. And Dowhauer, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, in 1987 found that practice on a single passage was not as effective as practice on a series of passages. And that led me to a big hint for these suggestions that I'm about to make. Okay, there are other approaches to fluency. Reading aloud is done a lot in schools, but is there a sufficient model? Is there sufficient feedback? Is there too much focus on one passage? And is there enough emphasis on prosody, or are the learners just barking at print, as Samuel says? Extensive reading is done a lot. It can't be done in some places, but if we are doing extensive reading, it doesn't really provide good coverage of or connection with our in-class stuff, what we're doing in class, right? And it doesn't provide much attention to prosody, not much emphasis on feedback, and the large volume may make it difficult for students to attend to specific language features. All right, so what do we suggest instead? Let's start off with fluency activities at the letter, phrase, and word level, especially at the younger ages. So grapheme dictation. So dictation with sounds that are and letters that are very common in English. The CH, SH, WH, TR, ED. These are not just letters, but they are letter combinations that are regularly found. Word dictation, especially a kind of phonics dictation, words that are spelled similarly or have similar features, orthographic features, can be done as dictations. Flashcards should be used a lot, particularly with sound. And this helps to develop words into sight words and build up that phonology, orthography, and semantic connection. Quizlet, if you're familiar with that, has this feature. Some apps have features for sight word recognition. And of course, teachers can do it in class with PowerPoint. I strongly recommend Quizlet because it can be customized by teachers and done out of class. And we could also use lists of vocabulary or phrases or sentences for timed reading aloud. Here's an example from Razinski and Cheeseman, right? And they have a list of 100 phrases here, and the students are simply going to read these aloud with a partner who checks their accuracy as they are timed to see how far they can get in a limited amount of time. This was made for native speakers, but you can see it's not particularly difficult for students to read these. And we could easily make these using the language from our own textbooks. And the important point is that there's time pressure and that learners have somebody who's monitoring them and checking their pronunciation. So this could be done with pairs in class. Early prosody training is also important. Recitation from a model like children's books or movie scenes. A hold it elicitation where the teacher reads out a sentence with appropriate prosody and the students hold it in their memories until the teacher says, okay, now repeat. This is an activity I often encourage people to use because it is a lot of fun and it's a great way to stretch the students' phonological loops.
This is Marguerite Fadden, the room host. Per your request, I'm informing you that you have a bit less than 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay. And another thing we could do is make multiple recordings of the target text. So if we have the students' textbooks, they're recorded in kind of slow, careful American English. We could record them in other versions and let students try them out with and practice them with reading aloud or shadowing. The last things I want to recommend are passage level, related reading, and reader's theater. And for related reading, we take a short passage, we create a short, some short passages, recycling the vocabulary from the target text. We add morphological variants. So if the word in the text appears responsible, we might put in the word responsibility. We record and make the audio available to students and set it as a homework practice. We set class time for performance and feedback. And then we time and track. We can do this as a jigsaw or a sequence within groups. There are different ways of examining. Here's an example. This is from a junior high school textbook. This is the original text, and something like this could be a related reading. And we don't have time right now, but you could see that a lot of the vocabulary is simply repeated. It's out of order and slightly different language is used, but nothing is too challenging for the students, but it allows them to practice reading and seeing the same language again. Here's another one of the second half of the. The last one is Reader's Theater, and this is similar, except that we take a passage and then we create a dialogue, recycling the vocabulary from the target text. We add morphological variants, conversation or discussion language, and we record and make the audio available for students, set it as homework or practice, and then set aside class time for performance and feedback. So this could be something like this from the same example. Hi, how was your trip to Australia? Great, I took some pictures. This one from Uluru, wow, it looks like a mountain. So a lot of this is very similar to what was in the textbook, but it adds a little bit of conversational language, and the students are expected to put in a little bit more intonation and stress to make it more natural as a conversation. Okay, in sum, speed, rate, and accuracy and prosody are all connected to better reading comprehension. How we do RR may be very important. Making use of deliberate practice, emphasizing vocabulary, morphological variants, and providing fluency training for letter, word, and phrase passages should lead to better word recognition and better comprehension. There, I've raced to the end. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
While we are preparing for a question, I would like to invite everybody to please unmute their microphones and give a round of applause to our presenter today. Thank you very much to Marcel for an interesting presentation. Now, we do only have a few minutes remaining. If you have a question, you can post it in the chat or raise your hand in the participants menu. I see that we already have a few questions in the chat here. So first, we can see, hello, Marcel. Do
Hi.
you have a sample of how your students track reading progress? Or it could be a sample of how you track your students' progress.
Yeah, I don't have a sample to provide right now. This book, the Mega Book of Fluency by Razinski, has lots of activities. The one that I made a copy of comes from this book. It also has a tracking form. If you just do a Google search or an Amazon search for Razinski, you can find examples of fluency tracking and fluency testing materials that he has produced. Did I?
If you have another question, please do feel free to raise your hand or write it in the chat.
Marcel.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Just a very quick question. This is probably a little bit silly of me, but the point of the oral reading is,
yes,
to improve the fluency of natural reading inside one's own head. Is that my understanding? Am I correct in that?
I think that's fair to say. One of the problems is that EFL students don't have a model for natural pronunciation within their own heads. So our goal is partly to build that in.
Yeah. So in a sense, the aim is not the performance of the oral reading per se, although obviously the idea is that the better that is, the more likely they are to develop the inner voice and therefore to develop fluency.
That sounds correct to me, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So once again, I would like to invite you to unmute yourself and give a round of applause to our presenter, Marcel. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much today.